Jason, a struggling single father, had lost everything: his job, his home, his faith in people, except for his unwavering love for his young daughter, Lily. When a mysterious woman, drenched from the storm and desperate for shelter, knocked on his door, he didn't hesitate to offer her safety. He had nothing left to give but kindness. What he didn't know was that she was no ordinary woman. She was Amelia Carter, a billionaire heiress who had been searching for one thing money could never buy: a loyal, genuine man. And Jason had just proven himself in a way that would change both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? Jason exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel as he sat in his rusted-out sedan, staring at the flickering neon sign of the rundown diner where he worked the night shift. His body ached, his hands calloused from double shifts, washing dishes and scrubbing grease off the floor, but the real weight pressing down on him wasn't exhaustion. It was the never-ending worry gnawing at his chest. Rent was due in 3 days, the fridge was nearly empty, and Lily, his sweet little girl, she needed new shoes. Hers had holes in the soles, and the winter chill had already started creeping into the air. He closed his eyes for a moment, rubbing his temples, before forcing himself out of the car. No time for self-pity, no time for weakness. The world didn't care if he was tired. It didn't care that he was barely holding on. Inside the diner, the smell of burnt coffee and fryer oil clung to the air. Jason pulled on his apron, nodding at the cook behind the counter. "Back again, huh?" the old man grunted, flipping a burger. "Gotta pay the bills." Jason forced a smile, but it felt hollow. He worked in silence, letting the rhythm of the job take over. Scrub, rinse, stack, repeat. Hours blurred together until the neon sign outside buzzed off, signaling closing time. Jason rolled his shoulders, the ache settling deep in his bones, and clocked out. By the time he got home, the tiny one-bedroom apartment felt even smaller. Lily was curled up on the old couch, wrapped in a too-thin blanket. The sight of her, so peaceful despite everything, made Jason's throat tighten. She should have better than this. She deserved better than this. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She stirred, blinking up at him sleepily. "Hey, Daddy," she murmured, her voice groggy but full of trust. Jason swallowed hard and forced a smile. "Hey, sweetheart, go back to sleep." He sat there for a long time, listening to her soft breathing, feeling the crushing weight of his failures. He was doing everything he could, but it never seemed like enough. Something had to change, but how? The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, their golden light casting a warm glow over a sea of glittering gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. Laughter and polite conversation filled the air, but to Amelia Carter, it all sounded hollow. She stood near the edge of the room, a champagne flute in her hand, swirling the liquid absently. Another event. Another night of forced smiles and empty conversations. Across the room, a well-known hedge fund manager laughed loudly at something one of his associates said, though Amelia knew he wasn't really listening. He was too busy eyeing her, the same way they always did, calculating, assessing, trying to figure out how they could fit into her world, not because of who she was, but because of what she had. Her father's empire was worth billions. That number had become her identity, overshadowing everything else about her. No one saw Amelia. They only saw the Carter fortune. A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Amelia, darling, where have you been hiding?" She turned to see Richard Hastings, the latest suitor her parents had paraded in front of her. He was everything she detested, entitled, arrogant, and utterly convinced that she was lucky to have his attention. She forced a smile. Just getting some air. Richard's smirk didn't falter. "You know, you don't have to pretend to be mysterious. We all know how this will end." She stiffened. "And how's that?" "With you coming to your senses, of course," he said, sipping his drink, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You'll marry someone like me, someone who understands your world." These little acts of rebellion, traveling alone, refusing to settle, none of it changes what you were born into. Amelia's stomach turned. She felt trapped in a world where every outcome had already been decided for her. Not this time. That night she packed a small bag. Nothing extravagant, just simple clothes, a few essentials, and enough cash to disappear for a while. She left behind her designer wardrobe, her expensive jewelry, and the suffocating expectations that came with them. Before dawn, she slipped out of the mansion, pulled a worn-out hoodie over her head, and got behind the wheel of an old sedan she had bought under an alias. For the first time in her life, Amelia Carter wasn't running towards wealth and privilege. She was running away from it. The rain pounded against the windshield in relentless sheets, the wipers struggling to clear the blur of water as Amelia gripped the steering wheel tighter. The roads were slick, the dim streetlights barely cutting through the storm. Every turn she made seemed to take her further into nowhere, the city lights long behind her. She had planned for a quiet escape, for solitude, for a chance to breathe without the weight of her last name pressing down on her. What she hadn't planned for was this, being stranded in the middle of a storm, her old sedan coughing out its last breath on a desolate road. The engine sputtered once, twice, then silence. Amelia's heart pounded as she twisted the key again. Nothing. She tried her phone, her fingers fumbling in the dim light. No signal, of course. Thunder rolled overhead, deep and menacing, followed by a flash of lightning that illuminated the empty road ahead. The cracked pavement stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with shadowy buildings that looked abandoned, lifeless. A sinking feeling clawed at her chest. She had to get out of here. Rain soaked through her hoodie the moment she stepped out, icy droplets running down her face, clinging to her skin. She pulled the hood tighter, her breath coming in shaky bursts as she squinted through the downpour, searching for any sign of life. Then, in the distance, a flickering porch light. Hope surged through her, quick and desperate. She started walking, her shoes splashing through puddles, the cold biting through her soaked clothes. The wind howled around her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt small, vulnerable. The house came into view, a modest, rundown structure, its wooden steps creaking under the weight of the storm. Amelia hesitated. She had never knocked on a stranger's door in her life, but tonight she had no choice. She raised her fist and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time, her fingers trembling from the cold. A light flicked on inside. Footsteps. The door creaked open, and she found herself staring into the tired, wary eyes of a man. A man who had no idea that the stranger standing on his doorstep, drenched and desperate, was one of the wealthiest women in the country. Jason squinted through the peephole, the harsh porch light casting long shadows over the drenched figure on his doorstep. A woman, soaked to the bone, shivering, her hood clinging to her face as the storm raged behind her. He hesitated. People didn't just show up at his door in the middle of the night, especially not in this neighborhood. She knocked again, harder this time. Desperation. Jason exhaled and unlatched the deadbolt, cracking the door open just enough to see her eyes, wide, pleading, exhausted. Her voice trembled, her breath uneven. My car broke down. No signal. She swallowed, as if the words burned her throat. I just need shelter for a little while. Jason glanced past her, down the darkened street. No cars, no movement. Just the relentless rain pounding against the pavement. Everything in his life had taught him to be cautious, to protect what little he had. But another part of him, the part that had struggled, that had been down and out, knew what it was like to have nowhere to go. He pushed the door open wider. Come in. She hesitated for half a second before stepping inside, dripping water onto the scuffed wooden floor. Jason shut the door behind her, locking it out of habit. The warmth of the tiny apartment wrapped around her immediately, the faint scent of coffee and something vaguely burnt lingering in the air. Lily's small pink backpack sat by the couch, crayons scattered on the table. Jason walked past her and grabbed a towel from a nearby chair, handing it over. "Here." She took it, her fingers trembling as she wrapped it around herself. "Thank you," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. Jason crossed his arms, studying her. The oversized hoodie, the soaked jeans. She didn't look homeless, but she also didn't look like she belonged around here. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. Just for a second. "Amelia." He nodded, deciding not to push further. "I don't have much, but I can make some tea. You warm up, and we'll figure out what to do." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, someone had helped her without asking for anything in return. Amelia pulled the warm towel tighter around her shoulders, her body still trembling from the cold. She sat at the small, slightly wobbly kitchen table, listening to the quiet sounds of Jason moving around, the clinking of a spoon against a mug, the low hum of the kettle heating on the stove, the occasional crackle of rain against the window, relentless but distant now that she was inside. She glanced around, taking in the space. It was modest, clean but worn, every piece of furniture looking like it had seen better days. A single shelf held a handful of books, a few framed photos, and in the corner on the couch a little girl slept, curled up beneath a thin blanket. A father. Something tightened in her chest. He was barely scraping by, and yet he'd let her in without hesitation. Jason set a steaming mug in front of her, his rough hands lingering for only a second before he sat across from her, watching her carefully. "Thanks," she murmured, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. She meant it, but the gratitude came with a pang of guilt. She had lied to him, not in words, but in omission. If he knew who she was, if he knew she could have snapped her fingers and had a team of people come to rescue her, would he still have let her in? Would he still have looked at her the way he was now, not with expectation, not with greed, but with quiet curiosity? "You from around here?" Jason finally asked. She hesitated, blowing on her tea to buy time. "No," she admitted. "I was just passing through." Jason leaned back slightly, arms crossed. Kind of a strange place to break down. The suspicion was there, subtle, but she could hear it. She didn't blame him. She was a soaking wet stranger knocking on his door in the middle of the night. And something told her Jason wasn't the kind of man who trusted easily. She met his gaze. It wasn't planned. That at least was the truth. Jason studied her for a long moment before nodding. He didn't press. He didn't demand answers, and that somehow made the guilt even worse. The aroma of something warm and slightly burnt filled the tiny apartment as Jason moved around the stove, scraping together a meal from the few ingredients he had left. Amelia sat at the small kitchen table, watching him in quiet fascination. There was no hired chef, no perfectly plated dish on fine china, just a man doing his best with what little he had. He placed 2 plates down, each holding a portion of scrambled eggs and a couple of slices of toast. The bread was slightly unevenly toasted, the eggs a bit overcooked. But when Jason sat down across from her, his expression unreadable, Amelia felt something she hadn't in a long time. Humility. "It's not much," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "but it's hot, and it'll fill you up." She picked up her fork, hesitating. This was a world away from the meticulously prepared meals she was used to. She had dined in Michelin-starred restaurants, had personal chefs cater to her every preference. But now, sitting in a small, dimly lit kitchen, across from a man who had given her a meal, despite barely having enough for himself, it felt like the most meaningful dinner she'd ever had. She took a bite. The eggs were slightly salty. The toast had a satisfying crunch. It was imperfect, and yet it tasted like kindness. Jason ate in silence for a few moments before he glanced at her. "So, Amelia, where were you headed before your car gave out?" She hesitated, swallowing her bite. "Nowhere, really." It wasn't exactly a lie. Jason gave a short chuckle, shaking his head. "Must be nice," he muttered, "being able to just go nowhere." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a slow sip of water before setting the glass down. "I don't have that luxury," he said simply. "I don't get to pick up and leave whenever life gets too hard. I've got Lily. She's my whole world. Everything I do is for her." Amelia followed his gaze to the sleeping child in the corner. There was no resentment in his voice, just pure, unwavering love. It made her chest tighten. Jason turned back to her. "Some days, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." His voice was low, almost as if he hadn't meant to say it out loud. She looked at him then, really looked at him, the tired lines on his face, the quiet desperation in his eyes. He wasn't a man asking for help. He was a man who had given up believing it would ever come. Amelia sat in the dimly lit living room, the quiet hum of the old heater filling the space. The storm had softened to a gentle drizzle outside, but inside, something far more profound was unfolding. She watched as Jason crouched beside the worn-out couch where Lily lay, her small frame curled beneath the thin blanket. His movements were careful, practiced. He smoothed the blanket over her tiny shoulders, tucking it just right, his rough, calloused hands infinitely gentle. The kind of tenderness that came from routine, not obligation, but love. Lily stirred, her sleepy eyes fluttering open for a moment. "Daddy?" she murmured, voice thick with exhaustion. Jason smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here." Amelia held her breath, something foreign pressing against her chest. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't the rehearsed affection she'd seen at charity galas, where businessmen paraded their families for the cameras. This was real. Lily yawned, her tiny fingers reaching out, gripping onto Jason's sleeve. "You won't go, right?" Jason's smile faltered, but only for a second. He smoothed her hair again. "Never. Never." Amelia clenched her hands in her lap, an unexpected ache blooming inside her. She had grown up in a world where people made promises only to break them. She had learned over time that words were just currency in high society, traded, negotiated, but rarely honored. But Jason didn't say things he didn't mean. He stayed by Lily's side until her fingers loosened, her breathing evened out, and the peaceful rhythm of sleep took her. Only then did he stand, rolling his shoulders as though the weight of the world had settled back onto them the moment she drifted off. He turned and caught Amelia watching. For a brief second their eyes met, and she saw something unspoken in his gaze, a vulnerability he probably didn't show to many. "You're a good father," she said softly. Jason exhaled, shaking his head as he rubbed a hand over his face. "I'm just doing my best." She wanted to tell him that his best was more than enough, that he was more than enough. But she didn't, because for the first time in her life, she was afraid of what it would mean if she let herself believe in a man like him. Jason sat in the cold metal chair across from the hiring manager, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. He had dressed the best he could, pressed his one decent shirt, made sure his shoes weren't scuffed, but it didn't seem to matter. The man in front of him, a middle-aged executive with tired eyes and an expression that barely concealed his impatience, was already shaking his head before Jason could finish his last sentence. "Look, Jason," the man sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "I appreciate you coming in, really, but we're looking for someone with more experience in management." Jason forced himself to stay calm. "I ran the inventory for my last job. I trained new employees, handled customer complaints." "I understand," the manager cut him off with a practiced smile, the kind that softened rejection without making it hurt any less. "But we have a lot of applicants, and at this time, we're moving forward with someone else." Jason swallowed the lump in his throat. He had heard these words too many times. The man slid a business card across the desk, as if it were some sort of consolation. "Try back in a few months. Maybe something will open up." Jason took the card out of habit, though he knew he'd never call. He didn't have a few months. By the time he stepped outside, the sky had turned a dull gray, the wind biting against his skin. His fists clenched in his coat pockets as he walked back to his car, the same old questions circling in his mind. How was he supposed to keep food on the table? How much longer could he scrape by before the landlord finally gave up on his late payments? And worst of all, what if Lily started to notice? By the time he got home, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin, but he didn't let it show. As soon as he opened the door, Lily's face lit up from where she sat on the couch, crayons scattered around her. "Daddy," she beamed, holding up a drawing. "Look, I made us a house with a big yard and a puppy." Jason's throat tightened. He smiled, a real one this time. "Looks perfect, sweetheart," he said, crouching beside her. "Just perfect." Because no matter how broken he felt inside, he couldn't let her see it. Not now, not ever. The apartment was dim when Jason walked in, the soft glow of the desk lamp barely cutting through the late afternoon shadows. He could hear Lily in the other room, humming quietly as she played with her toys. His heart ached, as it always did when he was home, but had nothing to offer. He had spent hours combing through job boards, making calls that led nowhere, and trying to convince himself that he hadn't just failed yet again. Amelia had been quiet the past few days. She had stayed out of his way, retreating into herself, always polite but distant. Jason hadn't pushed. He hadn't felt like he could. He wasn't the kind of man who asked for help, not even when he needed it most. But that night, she finally spoke. "Jason," Amelia said, her voice breaking through the silence like a lifeline. He looked up from where he had been staring at the pile of bills on the table. "Yeah, I want to help you," she said, her eyes steady and serious. "I've been thinking, you don't need to keep struggling like this." Jason's chest tightened, a lump forming in his throat. He stood up, shaking his head. "I can't keep taking things from you. You've already done enough. No," she cut him off gently, but firmly. "You haven't taken anything. You're not asking for charity." Jason's hands curled into fists at his sides. "It feels like charity." Amelia let out a small sigh, then looked down at the floor before meeting his gaze again. "There's a business I know. It's small, just a building project, but they're looking for someone to help with maintenance. It's temporary, just a few weeks of work to get things up and running. I could..." "He put your name forward." Jason's mind raced. It wasn't much. He wasn't going to get rich doing it, but it was a start. It would put food on the table. It would keep Lily safe, keep the lights on for just a little longer. But the idea of accepting help from her, after everything, felt like swallowing a stone. He tried to push the words back, but they slipped out anyway. "Why would you help me?" Her expression softened, and for a moment Jason could see something unspoken in her eyes. Something raw, something vulnerable. She wasn't just offering work. She was offering a chance, one he couldn't afford to ignore. "Because you don't deserve to carry this alone," she said quietly. "And maybe, just maybe, you're exactly the kind of person I've been searching for." Her words lingered in the air, heavy like a promise. He didn't know how to respond, but for the first time in weeks, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lost as he thought. The days blurred together, a mix of mundane chores, shared moments, and quiet understanding. Jason never asked Amelia to stay, never told her that he needed her. But she was there anyway, showing up day after day, helping in ways he never expected. It started small. Fixing a leaky faucet, replacing a broken light bulb, helping him organize the cluttered corner of the apartment where Lily's toys and books seemed to spill out endlessly. At first, Jason couldn't make sense of it. Why was she doing this? She wasn't obligated. She was a stranger, someone who had walked into his life by sheer accident. A woman from a world so far removed from his own. But slowly, as the days passed, Jason began to see that this wasn't about pity. It was something else entirely. Amelia would show up with bags of groceries in hand, insisting on cooking. At first, Jason had resisted. He was proud. He didn't want to feel like a charity case. But she'd insisted, with a smile that left no room for argument, and he had relented. They'd worked side by side in the cramped kitchen, and when Amelia had finished making a meal, she'd sit down with him and Lily, watching as the two of them shared a quiet dinner. She wasn't perfect, though. Jason would find little mistakes here and there, like the time she'd accidentally burnt the toast, or when she tried to make a salad with too much dressing. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter because, in those moments, there was laughter. There was something real. And slowly, Jason began to realize that this wasn't just about fixing a sink or making a meal. Amelia wasn't just fixing things around the house. She was fixing something inside him, something he hadn't even known was broken. Lily adored her too. The bond between them was undeniable. Amelia would read to her, laughing when Lily made up her own versions of the stories. She'd take her to the park, pushing her on the swings until a Lily begged her to stop because her legs hurt. Jason watched from the sidelines, amazed at how easily Amelia slipped into a role he never thought he'd be able to share. One night, after the dishes were done and Lily was in bed, the two of them sat in the dim light of the living room. Jason leaned back on the couch, his hands folded behind his head, while Amelia rested beside him. Neither of them spoke at first. They didn't need to. Finally, Amelia broke the silence. "I never realized how much I was missing," she said softly. Jason turned his head, meeting her eyes. "Missing? Real connection," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I've been so wrapped up in the things I thought mattered, work, status, money. But this is everything I didn't know I needed." Jason didn't say anything at first. He didn't know what to say. Instead, he just nodded. And for the first time in a long time, the weight of the world didn't feel so heavy. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the way Amelia always seemed to appear out of nowhere when he needed help, or how she'd disappear just as quickly without leaving a trace. It was the little things. Her reluctance to talk about her past, the way she avoided questions about where she came from, or how she had ended up stranded in the middle of nowhere. At first, he had brushed it off as nothing more than curiosity. But the more time they spent together, the more he realized how little he really knew about her. There were moments when she seemed almost too perfect, too composed, too far removed from the struggles he faced every day. He had come to rely on her in ways he hadn't expected. The meals, the laughter, the support, everything felt so natural, so easy. And yet, there was a distance in her eyes whenever the subject of her life before she showed up at his door came up. She would smile, change the subject, or laugh it off. But Jason could feel the walls going up. It was the day after she had helped him patch up a hole in the wall of the living room when he decided to ask again. He was tired of feeling like there was a barrier between them, tired of only getting half the story. "Amelia," he said as they sat at the kitchen table, a plate of leftovers between them, "I've been meaning to ask, what's your deal? I mean, you've been doing all this for me, helping out with everything, but you never really talk about yourself. Where'd you come from? What were you doing before all this?" Amelia froze, her fork hovering mid-air. For the briefest moment, her expression flickered. Something Jason couldn't quite read, something hidden just beneath the surface. She set the fork down slowly, wiping her hands on the napkin. "I told you, I was just passing through." Her voice was soft, but there was a sharpness to it, a quiet edge that hadn't been there before. Jason leaned forward, trying to keep his tone even. "I get that, but I don't know, something doesn't add up. You've got all these skills, all this knowledge about running a business, handling things that most people wouldn't know how to fix. And yet, you don't want to talk about it. Don't you think I deserve to know?" Her eyes flickered toward him, but she quickly looked away, folding her hands together in her lap. "I'm just trying to help you, Jason, that's all. Can't we leave it at that?" Jason stared at her, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. She was always so composed, so collected, but there was something in her eyes now, something that told him she was hiding something, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to know the truth. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Jason could feel the tension growing between them, a silent understanding that something was being kept from him. He didn't press further. Not then. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and Jason couldn't help but wonder, Who was Amelia really, and why had she chosen him? Jason opened the door to the harsh ring of the doorbell, his heart sinking when he saw his landlord, Mr. Harris, standing on the other side. The man's sour expression was enough to send a chill through him, even before the words came. "Got a minute?" Harris asked, stepping into the doorway without waiting for an invitation. His shoes squeaked against the worn hardwood floor as he entered, looking around with disdain. "I'll make this quick." Jason's stomach tightened. He'd been avoiding the inevitable, his overdue rent. But now, with Harris standing in front of him, the reality hit him all at once. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jason said, his voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside him. "I'm working on it. You know things have been tight." "Cut the crap," Harris interrupted, his voice sharp. "You've had 2 months to pay, and the place is a mess. I'm not running a charity here. If you can't pay, I'll find someone who can. Simple as that." Jason's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. He wanted to shout, to tell Harris exactly what he thought of him, but he didn't have the energy. He'd been holding his head above water for too long, fighting just to keep a roof over Lily's head. And now it was all slipping away. "I need more time," Jason said, his voice strained but calm. "Just a few more days. I've got something lined up. You can have the rent by the end of the week. Please, just give me the time." Harris didn't even flinch. He crossed his arms, eyeing Jason coldly. "End of the week? I've heard that before. You've got until Friday. If the money's not here by then, I'm starting the eviction process. Got it?" Jason nodded, but inside, everything was unraveling. Harris turned on his heel without another word, leaving Jason standing in the doorway, staring at the empty hallway. The finality of the landlord's words echoed in his ears. Eviction. Jason closed the door slowly, his hands shaking as he turned the lock. He sank against the wall, breathing heavily, trying to gather his thoughts. His eyes drifted to Lily, who was still sitting on the couch, her crayons scattered around her. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know how close they were to losing everything. He couldn't fail her. He couldn't. But how much longer could he keep up this fight? Jason sat at the kitchen table, the pile of bills in front of him growing larger by the day. He had tried to keep his focus on the job hunt, but every rejection felt like another weight added to his shoulders. Every "sorry, we've chosen another candidate" chipped away at whatever was left of his hope. He had been doing everything he could, but it never felt like enough. He didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. His mind kept racing. He needed the money for rent, for food, for Lily's school supplies, but he couldn't see a way out. He had reached a breaking point, and it was too much to carry alone. His phone buzzed on the table, a text from Amelia. "Everything okay?" Jason stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Yeah, just tired." He didn't want to burden her. She had already done more than enough for him, the meals, the help with Lily, the way she stepped in when he was struggling. He couldn't bring himself to ask her for more. Amelia didn't respond right away, and for a moment, Jason thought that would be the end of it. But then, the next day, he got a call. "Mr. Grayson?" the voice on the other end said, clear and professional. "This is Stephanie Adams from the Westbridge Group. We received your application, and we'd like to schedule an interview for a maintenance position we have open." Jason's breath caught in his throat. He had applied to dozens of places, but this was different. He had a real shot. The pay was better than anything he had found in months, and the stability it promised could change everything. He tried to keep his voice steady. "I appreciate the opportunity. When's the interview?" "Tomorrow at 10 a.m., she replied, and Jason felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. When he hung up, his mind was spinning. He had to prepare. He had to nail this. He couldn't afford to mess it up. But something inside him was nagging at him. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. He knew Amelia had been working behind the scenes, but it hit him with a new intensity now. She had done this for him. She had pulled strings, arranged this opportunity, when he had given up on even finding it. For a moment he stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone in his hand. He had no idea how to thank her for this, for everything. But there was something else stirring inside him now, a determination, a fierce resolve. He wasn't going to let her down. He wasn't going to let himself down. This was his chance. And he wasn't going to waste it. Jason's hand gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, his knuckles white as he stared at the letter in front of him. The ink was fresh, the message clear. A job offer, the kind of opportunity he'd been chasing for months. The salary was better than he could have imagined, the hours more manageable, the stability it promised, enough to change his life. But it was the last line of the letter that caught him off guard, the one that made his stomach churn. We are pleased to extend this offer, with special thanks to Miss Amelia Carter, for recommending you personally. His blood ran cold. He knew. He didn't need to ask. He could feel it. Amelia had somehow arranged this for him, used her connections to pull strings, to open a door that he couldn't have opened on his own. Jason closed his eyes, trying to calm the rapid beat of his heart. He didn't need charity. He didn't want it. He didn't want to owe anyone anything, not her, not anyone, not even if it meant securing the future he so desperately needed for Lily. He hadn't even realized he'd started pacing, until the sound of footsteps behind him broke the silence. Amelia appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She held a mug in her hands, but her eyes locked onto him with that same intense focus she always had. "I saw you got the offer," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm glad." Jason turned sharply, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You didn't need to do that," he said, his voice low but tight. "I don't want your help. I don't want your connections. I want to earn this. I want to do this on my own." Amelia looked taken aback, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she set the mug down on the counter and crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. "I didn't do it to make you feel small," she said quietly. "I did it because you deserve it. You've been fighting, Jason. You've been doing everything right. I'm just trying to help." Jason's chest tightened. He could hear the sincerity in her voice, but it didn't change the way he felt. "I don't need your pity. I don't need you fixing things for me. I need to stand on my own. I need to prove I can do this for Lily." He could see the hurt flash across her face before she masked it with a small, understanding smile. "I wasn't trying to fix you," she said softly. "I was just trying to make sure you didn't break." Jason turned away, his heart heavy. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate her support. He did, more than she could ever know. But he couldn't live with the thought that he owed someone else, not even someone like her. He had to do this on his own, for his pride, for his daughter. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the park as Jason pushed the swing higher, laughing at the squeals of delight coming from Lily. The air was crisp, the kind of day that made everything feel a little more alive. For a brief moment, everything felt right. No bills, no threats of eviction, no weight on his shoulders, just the sound of Lily's laughter and the joy of seeing her so happy. Amelia was beside him, sitting on the grass with her legs crossed, watching with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It had been her idea to bring Lily to the park. Something simple, something normal. But Jason could see there was more to it. She had been different today, more relaxed, more open. Her usual air of detachment had softened. "Push me higher, Daddy!" Lily shouted, her voice full of energy. Jason grinned and gave the swing another gentle push, feeling a warmth spread through him at the sight of her carefree joy. Amelia chuckled, standing up and walking over to them. "You're spoiling her, Jason," she said playfully, ruffling Lily's hair. Jason smiled back, shaking his head. "She deserves it." Amelia watched them for a moment, a distant look in her eyes before she stepped closer to the swing. "All right, my turn." Lily's face lit up. You're going to swing?" Amelia grinned, her smile wide and genuine for the first time in days. "Why not?" she said, sitting down on the swing. Jason watched, amused, as she pushed herself off the ground, her laughter ringing through the air as the swing creaked beneath her. For a moment, it was as though Amelia wasn't the woman who had everything to lose, the one who kept her life so tightly controlled. She was just a person, someone who found joy in the small, simple things. Jason saw something new in her, something real. She wasn't just the enigmatic woman who had come into his life, offering help and advice. She was more than that. She was someone who could laugh without worry, someone who could forget about the world for a moment and be fully present in the joy of the moment. Amelia looked at him as she swung higher, her hair flying in the wind. "See? You should try it too." Jason chuckled, a deep sound that surprised him. For the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of his problem slip away, if only for a few hours. They spent the rest of the evening running through the park, playing games and sharing jokes. It was one of those rare days when everything felt right, when they could forget about the struggles of life and simply enjoy being together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of pink and purple, Jason felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. And as he glanced over at Amelia laughing with Lily, he couldn't help but wonder if there was something deeper, something real, waiting for them both in this strange, unexpected journey they were on together. Jason sat on the couch, his legs stretched out in front of him, as he flipped through a stack of old newspapers, trying to ignore the pounding in his head. The stress of the last few weeks had left him drained, and his mind was racing, filled with the weight of uncertainty. He had been trying to keep his focus, trying to believe that everything would work out, but deep down, he knew things couldn't stay like this forever. Lily was in the other room, playing with her toys, and Amelia was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. He had grown used to the rhythm of their days together, the way she slid seamlessly into their lives, offering help and comfort without ever asking for anything in return. But today, something felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something was about to break. His phone buzzed suddenly, interrupting his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen, frowning when he saw the notification. A news report. His finger hesitated for a moment before he tapped the screen, curiosity gnawing at him. The headline caught his eye instantly. Billionaire heiress missing. Amelia Carter's disappearance raises questions. Jason's heart skipped a beat. His breath caught in his throat as the familiar face of Amelia appeared on the screen, the image from a recent photo they had taken together just days ago. But the report wasn't about her help or her kindness. It wasn't about the person she had shown herself to be in his life. The voiceover continued, cold and clinical. Amelia Carter, heir to the Carter Enterprises fortune, was reported missing earlier this week. Sources claim that Carter's sudden disappearance is linked to ongoing disputes within her family's empire, though few details have emerged regarding her whereabouts or why she chose to leave. Jason felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He couldn't breathe. His mind was reeling, the truth slamming into him like a freight train. She had lied to him. She wasn't just some woman who had stumbled into his life. She wasn't someone who had casually offered help. She was someone else entirely, someone with power, with wealth, with resources that he couldn't even begin to understand. His hands shook as he set the phone down on the table, his chest tight, with a feeling of betrayal. He had trusted her. She had been so kind, so genuine, but it had all been a lie. He couldn't fathom why she hadn't told him the truth, why she had hidden this from him. In the other room, he could hear Amelia laughing softly as she set the table. It felt like a lifetime ago that they had been laughing together, sharing quiet moments, finding solace in each other's company. But now, everything had changed. Jason stood up, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a heavy stone. He had no idea how to confront her, how to ask the questions that were swirling in his mind. But he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Jason couldn't breathe. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the pit of his stomach, each beat of his heart sending sharp pangs through his chest. Amelia, everything she had said, everything she had done, had been a lie. A carefully constructed facade, hiding the truth behind a veil of kindness and generosity. She wasn't just the woman who had helped him. She wasn't the woman who had walked into his life offering a hand when he was drowning. She was someone else entirely. He had trusted her. He had let her into his world, into his daughter's life, and now it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers, unraveling in a way he couldn't control. His fingers clenched into fists as the news report replayed in his mind. Billionaire heiress, Carter Enterprises, all that wealth, all that power, and she had never told him. Never once said a word about who she really was. How could she? Amelia had shown him only what she wanted him to see, the warm smiles, the help, the quiet support that had made him believe in something more. But none of it had been real. She had never been one of them. She had never been a part of his world. She had just been playing a part. Jason stood up abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor with a loud screech that made his nerves jump. He couldn't stay here, couldn't stay in the apartment with that lingering betrayal. He needed to get out, away from it all, away from her. He didn't want to feel this way. He didn't want to feel angry, hurt, or betrayed. But it was like a poison creeping through his veins, clouding everything he thought he knew. Amelia had crossed a line, and now everything they had built, every moment of connection, every quiet dinner, every laugh shared between him, her, and Lily, felt like a cruel joke. Jason grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, his movements sharp and unsteady. He had to get out. He couldn't be around her right now. He couldn't look at her and pretend that everything was okay when all he felt was the sting of being used. As he reached for the door, his eyes caught on the small picture of him and Lily on the mantel, taken just days before. The memory of that quiet afternoon, the warmth of their family, the joy in their laughter, felt so distant now, like a dream he couldn't grasp. He closed his eyes for a moment, the anger and hurt threatening to overwhelm him. But when he opened them again, the door was already halfway shut behind him. He couldn't look back, not now. Not until he figured out what to do with the mess she had left behind. Jason hadn't been gone long, but the silence in the apartment felt suffocating, like the weight of the world had fallen down around them. Lily sat on the couch, her legs crossed beneath her as she carefully colored in the picture she had drawn earlier. The soft scratching of her crayon against paper was the only sound filling the room. Amelia stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, her mind racing with everything that had just happened, the tension between her and Jason thick in the air. She didn't know what to do. Jason hadn't said much before he left, his eyes full of anger and betrayal. He hadn't even looked back when he stormed out, the door slamming behind him, as if he wanted to leave everything behind. He had every right to be angry. She had kept the truth from him, had hidden a part of herself from him that she should have shared. And now everything felt broken. Amelia ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady her breathing, but the panic she had been fighting all day was creeping up on her again. She knew she had hurt him, and she couldn't undo it. Then Lily's voice broke through the haze. "Amelia?" Her voice was soft, tentative. "Will you still be my friend?" Amelia froze. She turned slowly, her heart lurching in her chest, as she looked at Lily, sitting on the couch with her big, innocent eyes. She was so small, so unaware of the storm that was brewing around them, and yet there she was, asking the question that only a child could ask, simple and pure. Amelia felt a lump form in her throat. She knelt down in front of Lily, her chest tight, trying to swallow the overwhelming surge of emotions threatening to spill over. Lily's face was so hopeful, her crayon still gripped tightly in her small hands, as if everything depended on the answer. "Of course, sweetheart," Amelia whispered, her voice trembling. "I'll always be your friend." Lily's eyes lit up, her smile so wide and trusting that it made Amelia's heart ache. The little girl didn't understand the complexities, didn't know the weight of the lies, the distance that had grown between her father and Amelia. She only saw someone who had been there for her, someone who had cared, someone who made her laugh and shared in her joy. And in that moment, Amelia knew something that pierced through all the pain. Lily's love was pure, unconditional. She didn't judge. She didn't care about the past. She just wanted to know if Amelia would stay, if she would still be there, in the same way she had been. Amelia reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lily's forehead, her heart breaking at the simplicity of it all. "I'll always be here," she said softly. "You can count on me." Lily nodded, her face lighting up with a trust that only a child could give. Amelia held her gaze for a long moment, and in that fleeting exchange, a promise was made, one that she didn't know how she could keep, but one she would try with everything she had. The studio lights were blinding, and the hum of the cameras surrounding her felt like they were closing in on Amelia, intensifying the nerves that had been building in her chest for days. She had agreed to this interview, to finally come clean about who she was. But now that she was sitting there, poised on the edge of a revelation that could change everything, she wondered if she was making a mistake. The host, a well-known celebrity journalist named Rachel Simmons, smiled at her with that practiced warmth that seemed to hide more than it revealed. "Amelia," Rachel began, her voice smooth and confident, "you've been through a lot recently. Your disappearance, the turmoil within your family's business. You've been silent about your personal life for a long time, but now we have the privilege of having you here to share your story. Can you tell us what's been happening behind the scenes?" Amelia shifted in her seat, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. This was her moment, the moment she had been both dreading and longing for, the moment she could finally speak her truth, even if it meant everything she had worked for, everything she had tried to hide, could come crumbling down. She cleared her throat, then looked directly at the camera, her heart pounding. "There's been someone in my life recently. A man." She paused, feeling the eyes of millions of viewers trained on her, waiting for the next words. "And through him, I've realized something. Love isn't about wealth. It isn't about status or power." Rachel raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And who is this man? Is he someone from your past, someone we might know?" Amelia hesitated. The question hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. She knew the answer would lead her to a place where there was no turning back. But there was no point in hiding anymore. She had already lost so much by keeping up appearances. She let out a slow breath, her gaze softening as she spoke again, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable. "His name is Jason Grayson. He's a single father. He's struggling, doing everything he can to make ends meet. And despite everything he's going through, he's one of the most selfless, caring men I've ever met." Rachel leaned forward, her expression shifting from curiosity to genuine interest. "But you're saying that despite your family's wealth, despite everything you've known, this man has taught you something different?" Amelia nodded, her throat tightening as she spoke. "Yes. He's shown me that love, real love, isn't about what you have. It's about what you give. It's about loyalty, sacrifice, and the ability to see past what's on the surface. Jason doesn't care about my money or my family's name. He just cares about what's real." There was a moment of silence in the studio, the weight of her words settling like dust in the air. Amelia could feel the eyes of the world on her, waiting for the next bombshell to drop. She knew this would change things, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of clarity. This truth, this honesty, was the only way forward. Jason paced the small apartment, his mind a chaotic storm of thoughts that refused to settle. His hands were shaking, his chest tight with a mixture of anger, betrayal, and something else, something he couldn't quite identify. The news report had shattered everything. Amelia's secret, her lies, her carefully constructed life, had unraveled before his eyes, and now he was left standing in the wreckage, unsure of what to believe. He had trusted her. He had let her into his life, into his daughter's life, and now it felt like he had been a fool. Every word she had said, every act of kindness had seemed so genuine, so real, but it had all been a facade. How could he have been so blind? He stopped by the window, staring out at the gray skyline, the rain starting to fall in heavy sheets. It was as if the world was reflecting his inner turmoil, the heaviness that pressed down on him with every breath he took. He had fought so hard to keep everything together, his job, his home, his family, and now it all felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He thought about the good times with Amelia, the way she had made him feel seen, the way she had taken care of Lily, the way she had seemed to understand him without judgment. He thought about the laughter they had shared, the quiet dinners, the moments of peace. For a while, it had felt like he had something to hold on to, something real. But now, everything was clouded by doubt. Could he trust her again? Jason ran a hand through his hair, frustration building inside him. Part of him wanted to forgive her, wanted to believe that she had done all of this out of some misguided attempt to help him. But another part of him, one that had been burned too many times, couldn't let go of the feeling of being used. She had known who he was from the start, and yet she had kept her own secrets. How could he ever look at her the same way again? His thoughts turned to Lily. She had been so innocent, so trusting, and Jason hated the idea that she would ever feel betrayed too. She had already been through so much, and now she had to deal with the fallout of his broken heart, of his inability to move forward. He took a deep breath, his fists clenching, as he turned away from the window. He didn't have the answers. He didn't know if he could ever forgive Amelia, or if he could ever trust her again. But one thing was certain. He couldn't let this uncertainty tear him apart. He had to figure out what was best for Lily, what was best for him, and somehow, somewhere, find a way to heal. Amelia sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the papers in front of her, but her mind was miles away. She had spent the last few weeks trying to rebuild the pieces of her life, trying to find a way to make things right with Jason. She had been so careful, so calculated, hiding behind the shield of her wealth and power, afraid that if she let anyone get too close, they would see the truth, see her for what she really was. But then Jason had come into her life, and everything had changed. She had never expected to care about someone the way she cared about him. He wasn't like the others. He didn't want anything from her. He didn't want her money or her name. He just wanted to do right by his daughter, to fight every day to make sure she had a better life. And that was the part that hit her hardest. He had made her believe in something real again, but now, because of her lies, she feared she had lost him forever. She reached for the papers, her hands trembling as she picked up the contract that had just been finalized. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small business, a struggling local cafe that had been looking for the new management. The owners were ready to sell, and Amelia had stepped in, offering them a deal they couldn't refuse. This wasn't charity. This wasn't another handout. This was a chance, a real one, for Jason to build something on his own, to create a future without anyone's help, without any strings attached. She wasn't going to make the same mistake again. She wasn't going to hide behind her wealth and make him feel indebted to her. She was going to offer him a way out, a way to stand on his own 2 feet the way he had always wanted. She stood up, grabbing her jacket and heading toward the door. The decision had been made. She couldn't keep living in the shadows, couldn't keep hiding from the truth. She had to face Jason, had to show him that she wasn't the person he thought she was, that she was willing to give him a chance, not because of who she was, but because of who he was. When she arrived at his apartment, her heart was pounding. She knocked softly at first, then a little harder. She could feel the uncertainty rising in her chest, but there was no turning back now. She needed to be honest with him, no matter how painful it might be. Jason opened the door, his face weary, tired eyes meeting hers. "Amelia," he said, his voice rough, unsure of what was coming. She took a deep breath. "I bought a small business. It's a cafe, and I want you to run it. No strings, no pity. I'm offering you a real chance to do something for yourself. You deserve it." Jason's expression didn't change for a long moment. He stood there frozen, as if he couldn't quite believe what she was saying, but in her eyes, He saw the sincerity. He saw the truth in her words, and for the first time in weeks, the weight that had been pressing down on him lifted just a little. Amelia had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to face. She sat in the plush, sterile office, the sound of the city just beyond the glass walls muffled by the thick silence in the room. Jason was there, too, sitting beside her, his posture tense and stiff, as the man across the table spoke in a tone so polished it could have cut glass. "Amelia," the man said, his voice dripping with false charm, "you've made quite the choice, haven't you? A single father, someone with no real ambition, no standing, and now you're giving him control of your business?" His eyes flickered briefly to Jason, then back to her with a calculated smile. "I just want to make sure you're not making a mistake, especially one that could be damaging to your reputation." Amelia's jaw clenched, the tension in the air thickening. This was Oliver, a former suitor who had always made it clear that his interest in her was more about her wealth and status than anything else. He had always been calculating, always playing his cards with a grin. But now, as he sat in front of her, his attempt to discredit Jason, her Jason, struck her harder than she expected. "Damaging?" she repeated, her voice calm, but the anger simmering beneath the surface was unmistakable. "You think helping someone like Jason is damaging to my reputation?" She could feel Jason's eyes on her, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm, giving him an unspoken promise of support. Oliver's eyes flicked between them, a brief flicker of irritation crossing his face, before he masked it with a smirk. "You know how this world works, Amelia. A man with no connections, no title, no wealth. He's nothing more than a liability. And you're trusting him with something as important as your business?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "I'm just saying, maybe you don't know what you're getting into. Maybe Jason's not who you think he is." Jason's fingers tightened, his restraint visible, but Amelia's grip on him never faltered. Her gaze never wavered from Oliver's. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, but she wasn't backing down, not this time. "Jason is the kind of man who knows the value of hard work," Amelia said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "He's not a liability. He's the reason my business will succeed, and if you don't see that, then maybe you're the one who's out of touch." Oliver's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it, leaning forward with a feigned politeness. "Well, I hope you're right. But remember, Amelia, the world doesn't care about good intentions. It cares about results." "Then I'll make sure the results speak for themselves," Amelia said, standing up, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I'll make sure they come from my choice, not yours." She turned to Jason, meeting his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of her past decisions. She felt clear. She felt certain. Jason stood beside her, and without a word they walked out of the office together, their silence speaking louder than any words Oliver could have thrown at them. Jason sat on the edge of the couch, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the fabric, his thoughts tangled in knots. The silence between him and Amelia had stretched for days, each passing moment feeling heavier than the last. He had kept his distance, his anger still simmering beneath the surface, but the truth, her truth, had been haunting him. He had spent so much time closing himself off, trying to protect himself from the pain of feeling used, betrayed. But as the days wore on, he realized how much he was pushing away, not just Amelia, but the chance for something real, something better. When she arrived at his apartment, her heart was pounding. She knocked softly at first, then a little harder. She could feel the uncertainty rising in her chest, but there was no turning back now. She needed to be honest with him, no matter how painful it might be. Jason opened the door, his face weary, tired eyes meeting hers. "Amelia," he said, his voice rough, unsure of what was coming. She took a deep breath. "I bought a small business. It's a cafe, and I want you to run it. No strings, no pity. I'm offering you a real chance to do something for yourself. You deserve it." Jason's expression didn't change for a long moment. He stood there frozen, as if he couldn't quite believe what she was saying, but in her eyes he saw the sincerity, He saw the truth in her words, and for the first time in weeks, the weight that had been pressing down on him lifted just a little. Amelia had known this moment was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to face. She sat in the plush, sterile office, the sound of the city just beyond the glass walls muffled by the thick silence in the room. Jason was there, too, sitting beside her, his posture tense and stiff, as the man across the table spoke in a tone so polished it could have cut glass. "Amelia," the man said, his voice dripping with false charm, "you've made quite the choice, haven't you? A single father, someone with no real ambition, no standing, and now you're giving him control of your business?" His eyes flickered briefly to Jason, then back to her with a calculated smile. "I just want to make sure you're not making a mistake, especially one that could be damaging to your reputation." Amelia's jaw clenched, the tension in the air thickening. This was Oliver, a former suitor who had always made it clear that his interest in her was more about her wealth and status than anything else. He had always been calculating, always playing his cards with a grin. But now, as he sat in front of her, his attempt to discredit Jason, her Jason, struck her harder than she expected. "Damaging?" she repeated, her voice calm, but the anger simmering beneath the surface was unmistakable. "You think helping someone like Jason is damaging to my reputation?" She could feel Jason's eyes on her, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm, giving him an unspoken promise of support. Oliver's eyes flicked between them, a brief flicker of irritation crossing his face, before he masked it with a smirk. "You know how this world works, Amelia. A man with no connections, no title, no wealth. He's nothing more than a liability. And you're trusting him with something as important as your business?" He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "I'm just saying, maybe you don't know what you're getting into. Maybe Jason's not who you think he is." Jason's fingers tightened, his restraint visible, but Amelia's grip on him never faltered. Her gaze never wavered from Oliver's. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, but she wasn't backing down, not this time. "Jason is the kind of man who knows the value of hard work," Amelia said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "He's not a liability. He's the reason my business will succeed, and if you don't see that, then maybe you're the one who's out of touch." Oliver's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it, leaning forward with a feigned politeness. "Well, I hope you're right. But remember, Amelia, the world doesn't care about good intentions. It cares about results." "Then I'll make sure the results speak for themselves," Amelia said, standing up, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I'll make sure they come from my choice, not yours." She turned to Jason, meeting his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of her past decisions. She felt clear. She felt certain. Jason stood beside her, and without a word they walked out of the office together, their silence speaking louder than any words Oliver could have thrown at them. Jason sat on the edge of the couch, his fingers tracing the worn edges of the fabric, his thoughts tangled in knots. The silence between him and Amelia had stretched for days, each passing moment feeling heavier than the last. He had kept his distance, his anger still simmering beneath the surface, but the truth, her truth, had been haunting him. He had spent so much time closing himself off, trying to protect himself from the pain of feeling used, betrayed. But as the days wore on, he realized how much he was pushing away, not just Amelia, but the chance for something real, something better. "You're not a charity case," she continued, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "I don't want to help you because I can. I want to be with you because I choose to be. Not as a billionaire, not as someone who has everything, but as someone who has found love in the most unexpected place." She paused, her hands moving nervously in her lap. "Jason, I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know I want you in it. I don't want to just be someone who gives you a job or saves you from your problems. I want to be your equal, your partner, in every way." The room was so still, the only sound the soft rhythm of their breaths. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest, waiting for his response. But she couldn't wait any more. She had to say it, had to offer herself fully and completely, no walls between them. "Jason, Will you be with me? Not because of what I can do for you, but because you see me for who I really am." Her voice broke slightly at the last words, the vulnerability of the moment too much to hold back. "Will you marry me?" Jason's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing. The question, the weight of it, hit him harder than he expected. His eyes searched hers, looking for any hint of doubt, but all he saw was sincerity, the same sincerity that had drawn him to her in the first place. He stood, taking her hands in his own heart racing, as he realized something he had denied himself for so long. He had never stopped loving her. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will." And in that moment, as the tension between them finally dissolved into something new, something real, Amelia knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, no longer as a billionaire and a man, but as two people who had found something worth fighting for. The sun was low in the sky as Jason stood outside the small cafe, his hand resting on the doorframe. It was their new beginning, their fresh start, but everything felt different now. The weight of the past, of the mistakes, the lies, and the betrayals still lingered, but it didn't feel as heavy. It was as if, by taking this step together, they had chosen to leave it all behind. The cafe wasn't just a business to him, it was a symbol of everything they had fought for, everything they had worked to rebuild. Lily was inside, her small voice echoing through the walls as she played with the crayons Jason had bought her. Amelia was in the back, organizing the kitchen, her movements quick and purposeful. Jason watched her for a moment, the familiar ache in his chest returning. He had never imagined this life of ordinary moments, of quiet mornings spent together, of running a small business with the woman he loved. But now, as he stood there watching Amelia work, he realized that it was all he had ever wanted. He had spent so long pushing people away, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of being hurt again. But Amelia had shown him something different. She had shown him that love wasn't about wealth or status or power. It was about loyalty, about standing by each other when the world was falling apart. Jason walked inside, the bell above the door ringing softly as he entered. Amelia glanced up at him, her face softening when she saw him. She didn't say anything at first, just gave him a small smile. It was a smile that told him everything he needed to know, that she wasn't going anywhere, that she was here with him for the long haul. "Everything okay?" Jason asked, his voice low but full of warmth. Amelia nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yeah, just making sure everything's ready. It's our first real day after all." Jason stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. "It's not just the cafe, Amelia," he said softly. "It's us. This is our life now, and I'm not going to mess it up." Amelia turned, her eyes meeting his. "You don't have to worry about that," she said, her voice steady. "We're in this together. We always will be." He nodded, pulling her into an embrace, feeling her warmth against him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be days when they stumbled, days when they questioned everything. But in that moment, as the sun set behind them, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. They had made it, together. Lily's laughter rang out from the back room, pulling them both out of their thoughts. Jason pulled away from Amelia, his smile growing as he headed toward the sound of his daughter's voice. "We've got a long road ahead of us," he said, his hand finding Amelia's. "But with you two, I'm not afraid anymore." Amelia squeezed his hand, her smile matching his. "Me neither." And with that, they stepped into their new life, not as a billionaire and a single father, but as a family, proving that love and loyalty were the true measure of wealth. The rain tapped softly against the windows of the small office, the only sound in the room as Jason sat across from Amelia, the papers in front of him, a testament to the work they had done over the past few weeks. The charity was starting to take shape, slowly but surely. They had put together a plan to help struggling families, people like Jason had been, who needed a hand to lift them out of the darkness. He could still feel the weight of those days when he had nothing, when every night was a battle to keep going for Lily. Now he was on the other side, and it felt like a different life. Amelia was quieter than usual, her gaze focused on the documents, her fingers tracing the lines as if looking for something, some final piece to the puzzle. Jason watched her, the woman who had walked into his life with all the trappings of wealth, but who had proven that her heart was what mattered most. She had taken his world and turned it on its head, not with money, but with a kind of loyalty he had never known. "Are we really doing enough?" Jason asked, his voice low, the doubt creeping in as he glanced at the numbers on the page. "This is all real, Amelia, real families with real struggles. Are we giving them what they need?" Amelia looked up at him, her eyes warm but steady. "We're doing everything we can," she said softly. "This is just the beginning, Jason. We're building something lasting, something that can make a real difference. We're giving them hope, not just handouts." Jason nodded, but he could feel the weight of the world still pressing down on him. Helping people was one thing, but making sure it actually mattered, that it was enough, was something else entirely. He had never imagined being in this position, never imagined helping others the way he had been helped. It felt too big, too important, for him to let it slip through his fingers. Amelia leaned across the table, her hand covering his, grounding him in the moment. "Jason, look at what we've already accomplished," she said quietly. "We're already making a difference. You've lived this. You know better than anyone how much just a little bit of kindness can change everything. This isn't about doing it all at once. It's about taking the first step and then the next." Her words were simple, but they hit him harder than anything else. Jason swallowed hard, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. It had never been about the money. It had always been about showing others that someone cared, that someone understood. "I'm proud of you," Amelia said, her voice soft but sincere. Jason looked at her, his heart full, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a deep sense of peace. This was the life he had always wanted. Not the wealth, not the status, but the chance to give back, to create something that would help others the way he had been helped. And as they sat there together, knowing they had built something that mattered, Jason realized that this was the business of love. Lily stood by the window, her small hands pressed against the cool glass, her breath fogging up the surface as she peered out at the street. The world outside was busy, alive, but it felt like a different place than the one she had known just a year ago. She had always been aware of how little they had, how fragile their lives felt, but now everything was changing. Amelia was here, and somehow that seemed to make all the difference. Jason watched her from the doorway, his heart swelling as he saw the way Lily's eyes lit up whenever Amelia entered the room. It wasn't just about the gifts or the new clothes, though those had certainly made their lives easier. It was the way Amelia had stepped into Lily's life, not as an outsider, but as a mother figure, a woman who loved her without question, who gave her something Jason could never provide. The warmth, the care, the feeling of being wanted and loved just for who she was. "Mommy," Lily called, turning around with a wide smile as Amelia entered the room, her apron still on from the kitchen. Amelia's face softened and her heart ached at the sound of the word. It was still new, still strange to her, but it felt right. Amelia crouched down to Lily's level, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "Yes, sweetheart?" Lily held up a small drawing, her fingers slightly trembling with excitement. "I made this for you. It's us," she said, her voice filled with pride. The drawing was simple, crayon strokes filled with bright colors, but it was everything. It was the picture of a family, a mother and daughter, with Jason standing beside them, smiling. Amelia's throat tightened as she took the drawing, her fingers brushing against Lily's. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Jason watched them, his eyes misting over as he saw the connection between them, the bond that had grown stronger every day. Lily had once felt lost, adrift in a world that didn't always make sense to her. But now she had a future full of possibilities. She had a loving mother figure who would always be there, who would support her, guide her, and love her in ways Jason had never been able to. Lily's life was no longer about survival. It was about thriving, about dreams, about hope. She had a chance now, a real chance. As Amelia kissed Lily's forehead, Jason stepped closer, his heart full as he saw the little girl's face light up under Amelia's care. For the first time in a long time, Jason allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, their little family was exactly what they had all needed. And as the future stretched out before them, he knew that no matter what happened, they had each other. And that was all that truly mattered. The rain had stopped, but the streets outside still glistened under the streetlights as Jason and Amelia stood by the window, watching the world move on as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Their lives, once filled with uncertainty, had transformed into something beautiful, something neither of them had expected, and yet both of them had desperately needed. Jason had never imagined this kind of life, one where love wasn't defined by the size of a bank account or the prestige of a name. But now, as he stood beside Amelia watching the world go by, he realized that all the things he thought mattered, his job, his status, meant nothing. It was the moments they shared, the quiet acts of love and kindness that had built their new life. "Do you ever think about where we started?" Jason asked, his voice a little rough, his eyes still fixed on the rain-slicked streets. "How far we've come!" Amelia glanced up at him, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Every day," she said quietly. "I think about it all the time, but I don't think it matters as much as what we're building now, what we've built together." Jason turned to face her, his gaze steady as he reached for her hand. "I used to think that love wasn't enough," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that we needed more, money, status, all of that. But you've shown me that love is everything, and with it, we can have anything." Amelia stepped closer, her heart pounding as she looked up at him. "We've proven that, haven't we? We don't need wealth. We don't need titles. We have each other. And that's worth more than anything else in this world." Lily came running into the room, her little feet padding softly across the floor, and Jason's heart swelled with pride as she climbed into his arms. She was their proof that love had transformed their lives, that love had given them something that wealth never could, peace, joy, and a future filled with endless possibilities. "I love you," Jason whispered, his words directed at both of them, his voice thick with emotion. Amelia's eyes glistened as she wrapped her arms around him, holding on to both him and Lily. "I love you too," she whispered back, her heart full. Their story had become one that others whispered about, a tale of redemption, of transformation, of love conquering all. And though they hadn't set out to be an example for anyone, that was exactly what they had become, a living testament that no matter where you come from or what you have, love is the one thing that can give you everything. In that moment, as the city outside continued to move, as life rushed on, Jason and Amelia knew that they had found their happily ever after, not in the trappings of wealth or success, but in the simple, unshakable truth that together they had everything they needed. And that was all they ever needed.